Great. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our November work session. If everybody would be kind enough to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please take your seats. So we have a pretty interesting work session planned for this evening. It's going to encompass two different topics. First is going to be an update from Dr. Sue Guiney and Karen Shaw regarding the superintendent search, where they're going to present the leadership profile and survey results. So I think it's going to be really informative, and I will turn it over to Dr. Guiney and Mr. Shaw. Thank you.
I'm smooth. How's that sound? Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I guess the first thing that we want to say is thank you to everyone for inviting us into really what is your home here in the Jericho Public Schools and answering our questions and spending time with us. You made us feel really welcome. You were honest and really helped us learn so much more about you to make our job much easier as we are out there recruiting for your next superintendent.
Yes, it was really wonderful.
You can actually just turn the switch off.
I go on that one, that's really fine. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe. Thank you all again. It really was an amazing opportunity getting to meet everyone. We thank the Board of Education especially for engaging us and letting us be part of your community for this time. So this was wonderful. Also, thank you to Hank for being so supportive and taking us around, getting to see all the buildings. The students were amazing as we got to see all the different groups. That was really wonderful. And a big shout out to Denise Nash for all of her coordination, because it is a lot of coordination of getting the focus groups together and the dates and the times, and Denise has been wonderful. So I just wanted to give Denise a shout out. So we could go on. So I don't have to read all the groups, but you could see all of the different groups that we interviewed. We interviewed the Board of Education members each individually, and then all of those different groups we were able to meet with while we were here on site. Some of them were Zoom, some of them were in person. We also did have the opportunity to go around, as you said, to all the different buildings, which was wonderful, and we also had open forums as well. Great, so those were all the different groups. This was what was composed of in our community groups. So the school and community groups of the PTA Council, the large group from your goals workshop, the Chinese Association of Jericho, former Board of Education members, and then we had a morning Zoom session and a 7 p.m. Zoom session on October 30th. Great, and this is the list. We met with 156 people overall. The biggest group were those community groups, but we really did touch so many different people in our process. We also, if people were not able to make a session, we did give out our email addresses. A couple of wanted our phone numbers as well. We really tried to include as many people as possible in the process, because as we've said, this engagement process is so important, and Sue and I really, we are the first person that meets these candidates, so we really need to get to know the community, and this is our way of getting to know your community. These were the questions, so I'm sure many of you are in some of our focus groups. We ask everyone the same questions. It's the strengths of the district, the greatest challenges you see the district facing, and what characteristics you'd like to see in the next superintendent. And our report is based on these 3 questions. Next slide, thank you. So the strengths of the district, and probably none of this is surprising to any of you, but academic excellence came up as number 1, and a commitment to success for all students. Academic excellence, Jericho is known for, and that was definitely at the top of the list for all of the strengths in every group that we saw. A culture of thoughtful, deliberate listening and responding to the instructional, social, emotional needs of students, families, and staff. We heard so many stories about how the staff and the community really supports the students by listening, by caring. And teachers were on phones with students and on the weekends if they needed it, extra help after school. I mean, some of the amazing things that we heard here, I've never seen going on in other districts. So it really truly is an amazing place, and the commitment to the administration staff and all of the parents too, how supportive they are. So dedicated, committed, and highly qualified administrators, faculty, staff, highly engaged, supportive parents and community. The community really comes out for their students and the community. And this is, from what we've gathered, there's no Main Street in Jericho, there's no other part, so the schools are the community in Jericho, and that came across loud and clear. Outstanding local and national reputation and pride in the district. Everyone knows Jericho. Everyone knows Jericho is the top school district in the state of New York, and one of the top in the country. And even as we start recruiting candidates, people say, you know, what a wonderful opportunity to be able to come to Jericho. So everyone seems to know Jericho, and how outstanding your reputation is amazing. Professional and caring work environment. It seems the staff, everyone from bus drivers to custodians to teachers, aides, everyone really has a very professional, caring environment. Everyone has pride in the work that they do, no matter what it is that they do. Sound financial health and strong fiscal standing definitely is truly important. There is no going out for referendums, bonds, which you see in a lot of other school districts. You have such strong capital reserves, which really is supportive of the community as well. Students feel supported and that their voices are heard. It's amazing how included the students are and how they feel valued. In our student groups, they were even saying, you know, a new AI committee was formed and there were students on that committee. The student voice is really valued in the decisions that they make. And that's why we always like to have the student groups as well, because for us, hearing from the students, they are the consumers of the education. So I think it is the most important sometimes to hear really what the students think about the education. So we appreciate that. They're exceptional, they're motivated, they're engaged, eager to learn, they're kind to each other. Like Sue and I have seen how wonderful they were just in the group together. And your buildings are very well maintained, and all of the facilities here as well. Some of the challenges that we have talked about, and these were just, these were consistent themes that we've seen. So in our full report, we will have the notes as well, but these are consistent themes that we've seen. So develop a shared vision with the board. So really important, especially as a new superintendent coming in, what is the vision for the district? What does Jericho should look like in 3 to 5 years from now? Really, the board working together with the community, with the staff, creating some kind of plan or roadmap, that's gonna be a couple bullets down, but really creating that vision together. And that's so important, especially when a new superintendent comes in to go through that process. Developing systems to address K-12 assessment and consider the use of time schedules at the secondary level to support innovation and student wellness. So thinking about we did hear a lot from the students about their stress levels, and you know, that is not uncommon, especially in high achieving school districts, but are there ways that we could think about the way that their education is, and how we can help them within the education scheduling? Are there other things that we could potentially think about? There's enrollment increases, and that impacts the use of space, recruitment, hiring, and changing demographics. So taking a look at, will you need more space in the buildings? That could be a challenge as well. Establishing a strategic roadmap that defines the district priorities that are aligned to district vision and missions, as I talked about before. A little bit of a roadmap of where should Jericho be in the future? Where do we want this to go? Which is something that, you know, there is a great culture here. There's a culture of family, but culture and mission and vision is a little bit different. So thinking about where Jericho needs to go, and this aligns perfectly with a new person coming in and how you could all together with this new superintendent create this vision and mission statement. Establishing trust and work to build relationships and unity with all part of the school community. Integrating new and evolving technologies and neuroscience into instruction to promote student health and safety, innovation, creativity, and advance achievement for all learners. But really coming to, like, what does education look like in the future? Can we look at these things, integrating different technologies? Everyone knows AI, how important AI is these days, and not just the negatives about AI, but you have such creative and ambitious students. Like, what are the good things that they could think of? What are the different ways we could teach? And that's, we did hear themes of that, like maybe thinking about different ways to innovate and think of new technologies and how they could be part of the educational experience. And then we've heard what a challenge, especially for this new superintendent, is transitioning to a new superintendent in a way that understands the impact of following a longtime superintendent. And as everyone knows, Hank is a legend, not only here, but across the state, it seems. So there's big shoes to fill, and I know the community is very, nervous about him leaving, but Hank, it is his time to have some time to himself and retire. So, but it is going to be a transition period. It's going to be a period where people are going, even as we speak to candidates, they know they're going to have to come in and just listen and understand the community first. This has been a superintendent who has been here for really a beloved superintendent that has been here for a very long time. And this transition piece is going to be a challenge for the district. And a couple of the characteristics that we heard, and these are all alphabetized, so there's no ranking order. So the person able to galvanize the community, really bring the community together, able to navigate the board, accessible, visible, approachable, collaborative, confident, dedicated to Jericho, its traditions and values, and not to say the person has to know all about Jericho or be a Jericho person, but just really coming in and listening and understanding what Jericho's about, learning about the traditions. It's something that, someone coming to a district like Jericho, they can't come in and think they're gonna change everything here. And valuing that. An excellent listener, communicator, high level of professional trust, someone who's humble, innovative, someone who listens to and respectful of people with opposing views, maintains an open door policy. As we've heard, Hank has a very open door policy. Everyone can come in whenever they want, so that's what people want. Makes decisions what's based on right for the students. And like I said before, this is alphabetized because that is truly, you hear over and over again, what is so important, making decisions based on what's most important for students. Personable, professional, student-focused, trustworthy, and uses and understands the value of data and making data-driven decisions, which means when you make a decision, having data to back it up is really important because it validates the decision you're making, especially with someone new coming in. People are gonna wanna know why they're making that decision, so that's really important. And I love this little picture of someone with charisma. Be kind, be warm, be honest, be enthusiastic, and be positive. They really want a warm, loving person to come in. We can't clone Hank, which a lot of people have said we want to, but it's close to your personality as we can get. So we are looking for someone. A lot of what we heard is these soft skills that are really important too. It's not just, obviously we're gonna be looking for a strong educational leader and everyone who has the right criteria that needs to meet the standards, but having a personality and the soft skills, a lot of times that makes a huge difference in when you're looking for a new person. So, yep, and now I'm gonna pass it over to Sue for the
I'm going to
survey.
talk about the survey results. Okay. So the survey was based on Hazard Young Atia's research standards related to superintendent's leadership, and it was created as a valid and reliable instrument. The survey has two parts in terms of its methodology. So it has a Likert rating scale, and it looked at district performance at the first part, and the second part looked at the desired characteristics of the next superintendent. The survey was available online. It was totally anonymous, and the link was live from October 15th through November 4th. And the results were all tabulated by HYA in its Illinois office. The results you can see here in terms of the number of people who took the survey. The survey respondents self-selected a stakeholder category, and those categories were administrator, faculty, staff, students, parent or guardian with children in the Jericho Public Schools, and community members without children in the Jericho Public Schools. It was offered in English, Spanish, and in Mandarin, and there were 9 respondents who took the survey in Mandarin. We had a total of 253 respondents who participated in the survey. And the largest stakeholder group, when the survey results were tabulated, showed that they were parents at 47.8%. Nearly 25% of the respondents were your faculty at 22.1%. And the third largest group of participants in the survey were the students at 11.9%. And Karen mentioned that there is a final report, which we have shared with the district, and that we suggest is put up on your website, so you should have an opportunity to look at the survey report as well as the leadership profile report, and you could look at all the information in the background of all of these numbers, so you can take a look at the item analysis that will be available to you as well. Questions were presented in the Likert scale, like I mentioned, with 1 being you strongly disagree, to 5 with you strongly agreeing. And each statement was correlated to one of 4 categories: vision and values, teaching and learning, community engagement, and management. And the statements listed are the perceived strengths of the district, and these are in ranked order. So the number 1 strength of the district was facilities are well maintained, and that correlates to the category of management. And 89% of the respondents who took the survey felt that this was a district strength. The second item, the district has strong performance standards for all students. That correlates to the vision and values category. And 88% of the respondents felt that this was a district strength. Technology is integrated into the classroom, belongs to the teaching and learning category. And you had 86% of the respondents who felt this was a district strength. The fourth one is district schools are safe, again correlated to teaching and learning. And you had 85% of the respondents who felt that this was a district strength. And then the final statement, the district provides a well-rounded educational experience for all students, again correlated to teaching and learning, and 81% of the respondents felt this was a district strength. And you can see from these 5 statements that the majority of them, 3 out of the 5, correlate to teaching and learning, which is a great thing, because that's the business of the school district, is teaching and learning, so it's great that those are your strengths. One of the items that you should make note of is that a category, community engagement, is not there. So that's something that the district can take a look at going forward, and look at the item analysis. That's a good place to start a conversation. How could that be maybe looked at in the future? Maybe there's some questions that you'd like to ask about that, why that was not perceived in the top 5 that are here. We just point that out to you. The overall quality in the district, education in the district, was given a 90%, and that was a composite number from all of the individual stakeholders' scores. And again, go back to the item analysis. You can take a look at that in the main report. Look at each category, how individual stakeholders ranked these different statements and categories. These are the top-rated characteristics in the second part of the survey that constituents desire in a new superintendent. And the respondents were asked to select 4 statements from a list that they would deem to be most important in selecting the new superintendent. In this part of the survey, there was a focus on community engagement and vision and values as important characteristics in the next leader for the Jericho Public Schools. And the top 2 statements were to foster a professional climate. These are not ranked right here, but I'll just tell you the ones that were the top 2. Foster a positive professional climate of mutual trust and respect among faculty, staff, and administrators. And 50% of the respondents, 5 out of 6 of the stakeholder groups, selected that as a top rated characteristic. And the second highest ranking characteristic was to provide, transparent communication, and that's the second one from the bottom. And that 42% of the respondents selected that as a top characteristic. Again, 5 out of 6 of the stakeholder groups selected that as most important. And again, encouraging you to take a look, review the item analysis. Great starting point for rich conversations as we move forward. So looking at all of the comments that came to us from the focus groups and the interviews, and also looking at the results of the survey, what Karen and I did was we worked on putting together a formal document that listed the desired characteristics for your next superintendent. And what we saw from our conversations with everyone in the survey was a great amount of consistency. We didn't see any surprises. Everything really gelled well together. So when you talk about triangulating the data, when you're looking at statistics and you're looking at survey data and qualitative data, you want to make sure that everything is lined up. And we did find that in our work. So we put together this list for you. So after seeking input from its board members, parents, staff, students, and the community via focus groups, interviews, and online survey, the Jericho Board of Education would seek a strong strategic leader who addresses challenges and issues calmly, respectively, and is open to hearing opposing views, can balance the traditions and excellence of Jericho with having the fortitude, savvy, and people skills to develop, plan, and implement creative and futuristic ideas and programs to best support Jericho's students, demonstrates the ability to connect at all levels in a diverse community with multiple needs and high expectations, guides the district in defining its priorities and collaboratively develops a roadmap to assist the district in planning a future aligned to achieving its mission and vision, has a track record of authentic and compassionate leadership, has the ability to use data indicative of high-achieving districts to drive thoughtful decisions, district goals, and initiatives, invests in the community by being visible, present, approachable, and actively engaged in district and community events, and is well regarded in the educational community as a leader. In addition to that, the successful candidate, of course, will have to be certified as a superintendent or capable of gaining certification in New York State, and demonstrate a sincere commitment to the long-term success and well-being of the district. So that's the kind of the person that we're looking for and we're recruiting should hopefully come as close to those characteristics as possible. So what are the next steps? So Karen and I we've already started calling people and looking at people and meeting people, but recruiting is now going to go into high gear, we'll call it, as we go out with our marching orders with those characteristics. And over the next several weeks, we'll be meeting with people, checking references, doing all of that background work, with the goal of presenting a slate of candidates to the Board of Education over the months of December and January. The board will be interviewing during those times. And just as a reminder, this is a confidential search and only the Board of Education will be interviewing. And that's why it was so important that we had the opportunity to meet with all of you and have the survey results there, so we had all of your input to support and inform all of the work that's going to go forward from this point on. The board will be selecting someone with all, as far as we anticipate in the spring, and your next superintendent should be in place by July 1st, 2025. Thank you again for having us.
I forgot to ask you,
Sure.
is all the advertising done at this point, or are we still advertising?
The advertising is still up and available. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we may still be getting in.
We are still collecting applications. Honestly, we don't want to close any of the advertising until very close to the end, because we don't want to miss anyone who could apply who's a great person. And we stop looking when we start seeing the quality drop. So.
Can you tell us, I don't know if you can, how many applications you've received so far and how many you weeded down to for the board?
What we will do, our goal right now, because we're still receiving applications and we're still recruiting, we don't have a final number to give you as yet. It's a good number, I could say that. And our goal is to present 5.
20, 50, I don't know what a good number is.
Over, let's say, probably closer to 50 right now. Okay, but I would anticipate more. We would like to provide a slate of 5 to 7 candidates to the Board of Education.
And if they don't like that 5 or 7, you go back?
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. All right, wonderful. For the second part of tonight's work session, we're gonna have a panel discussion on the use of cell phones in schools. I know this is a hot button topic. We have a good attendance this evening, so hopefully we can have a nice discussion and hear from the experts. So with that, Mr. Cohen?
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually going to do probably more of just the opening and do a little bit of moderation, because I think the real experts to speak on this topic are going to be people in our schools. Most specifically, I'm going to introduce Dr. Danielle Smith and Dr. Wendy Goldstein, two psychologists at the high school, Mr. Ray Velez, the school social worker at the high school. Max Scharf is going to join us tonight, who is our student representative to the Board of Education. And Mike, you're going to join us as well. Mr. Hartnett is one of our highly respected English teachers and one of our leaders. So we're going to be able to give you a broad perspective. So if I can ask all five of you to come up and assume a chair, and then I will help moderate the conversation. You can stand.
I'm Sandra and a mover. Looks like I move around. Especially this late.
So as they're getting situated, I know that the conversation and the topic of cell phones in school has been quite prominent, not just here in Jericho, and certainly not just around Long Island, but quite frankly, around the whole country and even on a global level. And I think there are a number of factors that drive that conversation and quite frankly that concern. I know when I first went to Dr. Smith recently and asked her if she'd be part of a team that spoke tonight, she gladly was willing to be involved, but only upon the insistence that I read a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I'm not sure how many people in the room have had a chance to read it, but it's eye-opening, and I think it's an important book, not necessarily the end-all be-all, but certainly potentially important perspective. And one of the things as I've been reading the book that really came out to me strongly is when we're having the conversation about technology and cell phones in schools, I think it's a much broader conversation than that. I think it's almost impossible to have that conversation without including the role of social media. And when we put cell phones and technology and social media together, we realize that not only are they tools that, quite frankly, are probably here and here to stay as we move forward with society, but they have tremendous impact on our children's lives and certainly on our teenagers and adolescents. So you're going to hear that come out when we hear from our five constituents. But I also want to make it clear that this is intended to be an open discussion. So there are going to be points during tonight's, I guess, presentation, but it's really going to be, like I said, more of an open discussion where members of the panel are going to ask questions, and they're literally going to be questions that are intended for members of our audience that are in person tonight to be able to speak up, either ask questions of their own or potentially share their own anticipated insights around it. This is obviously important to our community and an important discussion around any potential decisions that we as a community need to make around our children having access to technology and access to cell phones, certainly during the school day, but quite frankly, it impacts them throughout their entire life. So you're going to hear some of the factors that it's certainly a school day conversation, but it's also a outside of the school day conversation equally. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Smith to start our conversation. So Dr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. So we're going to just talk a little bit about trends in mental health regarding social media. So I just want to ask a question before we begin. At what age do you all think that most kids get smartphones? In Europe. Smartphones. 8,
12,
12,
7,
7, 10,
4.
4. Okay, so you're all right. The reality of it is that we're seeing that kids, even at really young ages, are starting to get smartphones. However, the average that we're seeing is 10. So if we think about that, what do you think about social media and apps? At what age do you think that kids are getting that?
Earlier.
Yeah, so what we're starting to see is a trend in that kids are getting these even younger. And so just to talk a little bit about, you know, the beginning stages of cell phone use. So when I first got a cell phone, it was a little different than what it is now. So like, we had a phone that was like almost the size of this, maybe a little, well, the big ones at the time, but like in the 90s, they were like this, right? And so you only can call people. You would have people on it and that was it, right? And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, texting started, right? So we saw this change. Then in 2007, 8, we started to see the beginning stages of the Apple phone. And then in 2010, we saw this big change in the availability of smartphones, apps, and all of that. So when we think of that, just to understand the differences between the two, like a flip phone, the first generation type phone, compared to what a smartphone is now, are really different. They're really, really different. And what we're seeing is big changes in the development of individuals at very young ages with access to social media, you know, particularly the impacts of that. So what do you think some of the trends are in with regard to cell phone use and mental health? The negative, yes. What do we think though? What are some diagnoses that you think have kind of come about since? Yes.
ADHD.
ADHD, yeah. Depression, anxiety,
Addiction.
body dysmorphia, addiction, antisocial. So, well, these are clearly not all great things. We have noticed, as I was saying, about that 2010 mark, we started to see a real drastic shift. And that shift was more unusual than ever before. So what wound up happening is they looked at research from before 2010, and then all of a sudden from 2010 to 2020, there was this extreme incline with regard to mental health issues with individuals, specifically teens, than ever before. It was interesting, as I was doing research for this, it brought me back to 2014, when the APA, the American Psychological Association, had done a study talking about teen stress. And I remember, I think I was sitting in this room having a board presentation about this, as well as a faculty meeting, and hearing like the impact of social media at that time on kids' stress levels. And what we started to see was kind of like the middle stages of what now we're seeing in this. And so if you look at some of the research, as we were just talking, 13 to 17, we see 95% of kids have access to social media or using social media. Not too surprising, right? So you see YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. These are things that most individuals are using a lot of. And what's happening is, to the point of like isolation, is we're seeing more and more kids become a little bit more isolated in their responses. So the interactions that we have, human-wise, doesn't really happen. You know, it's more texting, it's even, you know, abbreviations, you don't even get full sentences. It's changed. So in 2023, the US Surgeon General really got a whole advisory committee together to look at these unfortunate trends. And what they found was, again, the increased levels of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and suicide risk had greatly gone up, as well as sleep disturbance. So what we know when we think about sleep disturbance, it impacts all of those things. It impacts our mood, it impacts our ability to be able to function. And it was interesting because when I was hearing about the what we were looking for in a new superintendent, and they were talking about the neuroscience. Like, if we look at the neuroscience of what we know now about the brain and how the brain is impacted, specifically for teens. At the teenage age, that age range, the brain is under so much construction. And that's why they are more vulnerable to these type of areas than at any other point in their life. And that's why it is important when we look at this, we're not only looking at what's happening within the school, but we're really looking at what happens at home. Because it really requires everyone to kind of be together on this. So I know Mr. Velez is going to be adding to a little bit of this, so I'm gonna pass the clicker over to him. You don't want the clicker?
Folks, one-
Okay, then I will do the clicker.
Okay, so my question to you all, the research to support the use of cell phones in school, what do you think some of those reasons might be?
Like,
Nothing at all, okay.
They give opportunities for some of, I've seen like the surveys, and it does give you some data and gives you some, the interaction might, help the student engage.
Okay, yeah. Anything else? Any other benefits to having cell phones in schools? Or what do you think the research may say, even if you don't agree with it?
scheduling,
Schedule.
Well, we're talking about research, right? So I mean, I think there's a lot of opinion on why people may think cell phones are useful in school or in the classroom. Personally, I'm a bit naive with respect to what the research is to support it. And I'm not sure there is.
And this is going to be based on opinion.
In case of emergency or parent contact?
Definitely.
I don't know that this is a reason to have them or that research supports this, but I know that it's helpful for, groups of students who are in severe social anxiety and perhaps really cannot engage with others and this isn't used to engage, or even like meditative or music apps that foster a healthier learning environment for different kids.
Yes, so that definitely fits in now if you look at the screen. The first one is similar to what you were saying, Jill, in terms of enhancing learning. It says cell phone use can enhance learning opportunities. I know that there are a lot of teachers who use phones in interactive ways to get the students to kind of be more engaged in certain opportunities that may come across in certain classrooms.
the bank team, you know,
What was that?
the bank team.
Or-
Who's the bar team?
who was the-
It was a research group that looked at,
Are they owned by Apple? I mean, that's what I'm saying, are they just?
yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Actually, that's a good point, I don't know. I don't know who owns it.
So one of the other things in classrooms that's also utilized is in terms of efficiency. I know that there are some teachers who ask their students to maybe take a picture of their work, submit it on Canvas so that it can be done efficiently and right away, so that they don't get backed up with all of their classes and when it comes to submitting work. To foster communication and collaboration with peers, a lot of times there are group projects, so sometimes students rely on utilizing their cell phones to kind of get things done, communicate with the members of their group. This very PowerPoint or Google slide presentation, you have access to it on your phone. You can edit it, you can collaborate with peers right in real time, and kind of have access to things a lot easier. And also assist, as you said, in emergency situations, which leads to the next bullet point. Parents have access to children. In the Education Week article, September 2024 reported that parents find allowing their children to have cell phone use in school gives them access to their child in the event of an emergency. We all know emergencies are unfortunately a regular part of our lives. Whether we have fire drills, whether we have lockdown drills, we understand that things unfortunately do happen. I think as parents, we all have a level of anxiety when we send our children off to school, whether it be from kindergarten all the way up through high school. And having that peace of mind, knowing that you can access your child in the event of emergency, does provide some peace of mind. And maybe even in a less severe type of case, oftentimes you get students who may forget something at home. I've seen oftentimes students come to school, I have my Crocs on, I have gym today, can you bring me my sneakers? So sometimes having that availability to quickly contact a parent is something that students find helpful. Next, similar to what was stated in terms of using a phone as a coping strategy. Adolescents may use cell phones to help cope with daily stressors, the use of music, calming apps. We do understand that in our school district, a lot of our students do have a lot of academic rigor, their schedules are very intense, and
oftentimes we have to convince them to take time to decompress. That's why we have wellness days here, and we try to find ways for the students to really take a bit of a break from the academic rigor that they go through. And as a social worker, most of you know that my room, Cafe 126, is an area where students go to decompress. They can go there during their lunch periods, free periods, they sit down. And oftentimes they're sitting down, they're on the phone, they're listening to music. Sometimes they're playing a game, they're watching videos. So it is something that can help them during that downtime to kind of just release a bit of stress. And one of the things that the phone does help, even before cell phones existed, there were always certain kids who kind of preferred to sit by themselves or were in certain isolated areas of maybe the cafeteria, things of that sort. And it was something that was considered like a social stigma to be by yourself. Now, if a kid is sitting by themselves, they have their earpods on, they're just spending time kind of decompressing, it doesn't look necessarily out of place. And there are a lot of students in my office who prefer to sit down maybe on the love seat that we have in the corner, and you hear them laughing to themselves and really just taking that time to kind of take a bit of a break. And lastly, what's on the list is preparing students for post-secondary experiences. A main aspect of high school, of what we like to do obviously, is prepare students for the real world, life beyond high school, even life beyond college. And the reality is that a large percentage of jobs rely significantly on cell phone use. Whether it be to access your emails, whether it be to try and multitask to some capacity, utilizing certain work-specific applications. The reality is that many jobs entail the usage of cell phones. So being able to kind of navigate that and balance your responsibilities that you have and utilizing the phone when efficient or when necessary is something that's going to be part of their lives beyond high school. And that is my section.
I'm sorry, it's interesting, I'm sorry, just to go back to the previous slide. It's interesting, you know, one of the things that we hear as a Board of Education, and certainly I had it read as an Education Week article, you know, we hear from a lot of kids and parents that they feel better knowing that their children have a cell phone in school in case of an emergency. We've talked about this in previous meetings. It's interesting that it's totally at odds with the guidance we get from the police department and law enforcement agencies. Granted, there's a wide variety of emergencies. I mean, it could be a flood, we've had that. It could be a fire, we've had that. God forbid there was a violent act that took place. I mean, parents calling their kids potentially makes the kid or the classroom a target if they're sheltering or trying to hide. So I think obviously that's something that's ripe for discussion. But it's just interesting the different perspectives.
Just a word on, because the other part of contact when it comes to parents has nothing to do with emergencies. That, your son and daughter walks out in the morning and is in a bad mood or seems off, or has something that has been stressing them out, and you just want to check in with them one time during the day. Now, that's a component that in the 21st century has been part of the rhythm of people's lives. That certainly didn't exist when I was a kid. I'm just saying it's a changed dynamic, and it's part of a parent-student-child relationship that exists today, that I don't know if it's necessary, but we should acknowledge it exists and it's part of the rhythm. Now, there's a crazy relationship where you check in on every grade and every time, and and the helicopter approach, but
which happens too.
right. There's obviously there's real negatives to it, but there can be checking once in, knowing when the lunch period is, and just saying, hey, how you doing? There's something incredibly kind and sweet about that, and nurturing, that I just want to take outside of the emergency case. So.
And I think it's interesting. I think that's a good point, Mike. And even Krista speaking to what you're talking about, I think there's a lot of paradoxical information that goes on here because as Ray's talking about some of these aspects, and again, whether anyone in the room perceives it as a positive, a strength, or a compelling reason to have phones in school or to not. I think back to Danielle's opening slide and where she's talking about there's no denying the fact that we've seen an uptick in anxiety and depression and so many important mental health factors that we're seeing in our teenagers. So, while Ray is talking about how cell phones could provide some of our students with important coping strategies, how does that tie in? And I'm not so sure that it's one versus the other. I think it's a really complex, intertwined dynamic of how we as humans, and certainly how our teenagers are interacting with each other with technology, and where there are times where it's a strength, and certainly plenty of times where it can present itself as a challenge and a weakness.
I was actually at a meeting yesterday with a lot of elementary administrators who were talking about now, you know, in elementary schools, you have to put your cell phone in the backpacks, and I remember my kid doing that. But now, it's very common for a lot of the younger kids to have Apple Watches.
Yeah.
So their parents are contacting them on these watches. So it's like, okay, if we take away the phones, then you're gonna be starting to take away their watches, and then you're gonna start to take away their iPads. Like, when does it stop taking away from, instead of just trusting your kid or doing it responsibly?
And I think, another, thing that I've heard from parents is that, you know, it's a lot different navigating the cell phone use for someone in elementary school versus someone who's in high school. Things, you know, students that are, you know, 16, 17 are able to, you know, regulate themselves a little bit better than obviously students who are younger. So when we think about, you know, overall policy or, you know, allowing cell phones in school, and I think we do have to think about the different levels of the schools and what, you know, how we're gonna, like you said, get our kids ready for post-secondary.
Well, that's a big piece of it, right? So like, we could, you know, we could say, we don't want kids to have phones, right? And then at some point, the kids leave here, and they have to have phones, or they go home, and they're home for 9 hours, and they have a phone. So like, where is the education piece of that, too? So I think it's tough to know where to fit in this.
And I know we're gonna transition to Dr. Goldstein in a second, but Max, I know you have some insights that I wanna share.
I think all those comments, no,
I was just gonna say, with respect to the conversation of taking things away and moving on to Apple Watches and other devices, I think a lot of the things about phones and a lot of the concerns there with distractions exist either, you know, to the same extent, maybe to a greater extent, with all devices, you know, Apple Watches, other computers or things that are integrated in the classroom. And even if it's not looking to the extent of, all right, we take away phones and we take away Apple Watches, then we take away this, if we're leaving it, it's isolating students even more. It's those students that are maybe even, you know, reliant on school-issued Chromebooks. You know, there's definitely a large percentage of that across the high school, middle school. But there's also a large percentage of students that have, you know, Macs, so they have an iPad or they have something like that. And with that, if you take away their phone, they can still text their friends, they can still do that. And for the population of students that maybe don't have those devices and maybe can't engage in that, I think, you know, that's a big concern as well. It's like I said.
you and I were thinking about the same thing, Mr. Sharp, because I think in two parts. One, if this was a black and white issue, I don't think it would take 6 people. We've never had 6 people participate in the panel before. So yes, we all know it's a complicated issue. 2, clearly, you know, it's not necessarily one size fits all, but to Mr. Sharp's point, this policy that I'm sorry, not the policy, the issues that we're talking about go all the way up to every student using the school-issued Chromebook, and basically all outside technology. I mean, granted, that would be the most extreme answer, but that's definitely something that people have talked about. And there's certain things that other school districts do where everybody's using a school device, so there isn't that extra texting on the side, there isn't that extra advantage, or, oh, I've got the money to buy a $2,000 MacBook and you don't. It would be, you know, it's one of the considerations that I think this whole conversation is about.
Yeah, I think.
Is it phones and watches, is it phones, watches, and personal laptops? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
Everything is on the
And
table.
AI glasses that are.
Yeah, shoot phone.
It's funny, I heard from someone who was talking about students that in one school where they've implemented only using district provided devices, where students are opening up Google Sheets and Google Docs, and they're using that as their texting source. So, listen, you know, certainly I didn't have access to a cell phone or access to the technology that our teenagers do when I was in school, but certainly there's always going to be a focus issue. And by the way, that doesn't mean that we don't do anything, but I think that there's some practical reality in that. But again, certainly our intent isn't just to merely have a slide showing the positivities of cell phones in school. I think that would be a bit naive. So there's certainly another side to it, and certainly plenty of negatives or challenges that we see by having cell phones and technology in school. So I'm gonna switch over to Dr. Goldstein. Max, it sounds like you want to add
Just
something before I
just
do
quickly, yeah, I think a lot of what we're talking about now with, all devices and that whole kind of, conglomerate, that whole theme goes back to that, I guess the last bullet on that last slide, talking about, going to a post-secondary experience. Because if we do go to, down that route of kind of just fully restricting onto, school-issued Chromebooks, of course, not even speaking to the, the challenges of that just happened with that kind of, those device restrictions, but then it's also, a lot of it is preparing for, down the road, and the kind of leverages and the advantages of technology is going to be even more integrated and even more kind of ubiquitous in the workforce, in college, and on a university level. And I think it's really important to kind of establish that now as where, we're shaping students to move on, right? And we want to give them the best experience and the most reflective of what their future life would look like.
But you realize we're only talking about 6.5 hours a day.
No, sure, and I think what happens with that, right, if we kind of, make it taboo in school, and whether it's phones or just kind of devices in general, or like even vilify it, I think a lot of that does push it back to, maybe making it even more of an issue at home, even more of a thing like, hey, my phone is, I have it on my phone all day, now I'm running to, get it when I get home, and I think a lot of the kind of, whatever, the anxiety, the depression, or those kinds of issues that happen with cell phones, they're not gonna go away, right? If we're just kind of ignoring it exists as an issue in the classroom, but also it exists as an issue at home, right? And I think we can't ignore that aspect of it, and we can't just kind of, as much as it is preventing or hurting productivity in the classroom on, let's say as a teacher is frustrated by a student on their phone, if you think about it on, a larger scale, if you go to that greater extremes, I think it'll just kind of, exacerbate those issues that you see on just a general device usage or phone usage level, and then it creates those problems to kind of carry on throughout, like I was saying, further levels of one's, university of working in general. And I think a greater emphasis should be placed, now in the kind of educational space, at least, maybe definitely in the high school, or maybe in the high school, definitely even younger, of just kind of helping students deal with the phones, helping students gain the strategies that they need to be able to not have these issues persist into the rest of their life. I think a lot of that comes with just open and honest conversations.
Thank you, Rich, appreciate that. And again, I think part of the conversation that we're having,
I just want to say one thing.
Sure, go ahead,
Point
Allison.
out, in the survey from the women that were here earlier, one of the strengths of the district, I think was 86%, was our use of technology in the district. That was one of the top 5. So it's kind of ironic that we would want to take away one of our strengths.
And again, I'm not sure where we're heading with it, so
I just wanted to point out.
totally agree. So with that, as I was saying, I think we all know that there are some potential negatives that come out, whether it's the extreme of the depression and the anxiety, or the simplicity and distraction, but let me let Dr. Goldstein speak into some of the specificity.
So I know, yes, as we heard of the trends with the mental health issues. Also, I'm sure some of you were surprised that there were as many positives as there were, and there were probably some that were surprised that that's all there were. We did do the research, and there was a multitude of reasons limiting the, supporting the limitation of cell phones in the classroom. But we wanted to ask you what you think some of the major, we talked about the mental health issues, we talked about the social issues. Is there anything specific that you can think of that you think would lend us to say we should limit cell phones in the classroom?
It's a distraction, 100% distraction away from whatever the teacher is trying to convey to students.
Distractor. Mm-hmm. Any other reasons?
Cheating.
I see it as a distraction even in hallways. Sometimes the kids will walk and they'll walk right into you. You have to watch out because they got their heads down like this.
Not just
Very good
always,
point.
streets.
It's sort of, mostly, and I understand if you go the other way, it has the stress levels as kids are worried about what they're missing, what they should be responding to at that point. We spend all this time on bullying. My understanding is cell phones and texting and all types of social media are used to bully other students, and if we can cut down on that during the day, I think that would be positive. Mr. Sharp pointed, may just pick up at 3:30 in the afternoon, I fully get that, but, you know, you do what you can. I think you guys have talked about the negative mental health issues, so.
I was gonna say that as well, I definitely, there's a lot of literature out there about the rise in bullying, and seen along with the rise in cell phone and especially social media use. But one other thing that I've seen personally working with kids is just how it's altered the way people talk to each other, or their ability to talk to people, look people in the eyes and speak, just make small talk. I feel like there's just so much instant gratification, it's not wanting to just have a conversation, but it's, you know, if it can be done by text, why not do it by text? And I think that as much as you're talking about post-secondary engagement and being, you know, worldwide citizens of the world, I think that's a very valuable skill that potentially could be harmed by kids have an increased reliance on cell phones as a way of communicating.
Or you see the kids are handicapped in their way they socialize with each other. And I see it in my own kids. You know, they have friends come over, and you know, when we were kids, we were outside riding bicycles or digging holes or whatever, and they're sitting there literally in the same room for a play date, whatever, and they're communicating over their devices, whether it's an iPad, playing Roblox, which is, you know, essentially social media, because they're able to communicate through it, to, you know, to not so much, you know, Facebook, what the kids use now, Snapchat, and all that stuff. It's a problem. Interesting you bring up bullying. So, you know, when we were kids, bullying was, you know, largely something that happened in school, because there weren't devices to take it home. You know, nobody was gonna bully you when you were in the safety of your own home. You know, they could call the house and crank call you, but, you know, that was pretty easy to pick up. But now that, you know, continues potentially all night long, with these kids are sleeping with devices in their bedrooms. That's a whole other conversation. You know, what do you do with that? You know, exposure to blue light, exposure to, you know, electromagnetic radiation, having, you know, cell phones laying on your leg all day. I mean, what are the risks of that? I don't know. You know, there's lots of.
So it sounds like these are amazing answers, and you notice they're all up there. And what you said are all, you know, total common sense, but there is research that lends itself to show that these are really correct and legitimate concerns. The first one, distraction in the classroom. Look, we all know kids were distracted before cell phones came about. I mean, for many reasons. I mean, kids could be distracted by the student next to them tapping their pen. Kids could be distracted by thinking, what are they going to do after school? Who are they going to hang out with this weekend? Something flies by out the window. But this is just another factor that adds to it. And one of these, this UNESCO study, that's an international study, they surveyed 14 countries, and it looks at using a phone. They said when a student is on their phone and they put it down, it takes about 20 minutes for them to be able to refocus their attention onto the task. So just picture that. They're in a math class, they're on their phone, they're texting their friends, and your teacher is already teaching, you know, a proof in geometry, and it's going to take them about 20 minutes to be able to latch on to that concept, and there's a lag in learning for that. There are also lots of studies, and what we wanted to do is look at the studies based on the teacher, student, and parent responses, and we did that. The Pew study out of Washington, D.C. Shows that with teachers, they said a third of the K through 12 teachers thought that phones were a distraction. But then when you look at high school teachers, 72% of the teachers felt that phones were distractors in the classroom. Dr. Hardy could talk
We
more
had
about
similar
that.
survey results, very similar on the Jericho level.
As far as students, there was a report in 2022 that said that 54% of students feel that they get distracted by their phones. And Max is going to talk about his data, which I think he already presented, that 49.5% of our Jericho high school population said it does hinder their productivity in the classroom. And then we looked at a national parent union survey where 70% of the parents felt that cell phones should not be in the main core area class time, but about half of them, over half of them, about 35% felt that they should have access to their phones throughout the day. I mean, we know that things are changing in society too. When I went to school, we didn't have all these sports and after-school activities, and we weren't as busy as these kids are today. So you have to see how busy, parents need to get in touch with their kids to say, oh, I can't pick you up today because your track schedule has changed, or Mom, I need to be picked up earlier, I now have a debate meeting. So it's understandable with the changing of the times that will need to change as well, but that's where the navigation gets a little bit more complicated.
So, Dr. Goldstein, you brought up an important point. You gave some data in general from another study about teacher perspective. And obviously, we have Dr. Hardnick here. So I know you did some research. If you could speak into that.
Yeah, I just want to go on a quick tangent. My apologies because of this idea of I don't want to over romanticize the past. You know, for many of you probably read Catcher in the Rye, for example. There are no shortages of awkward adolescents who had trouble communicating with other students over time. We're also at a time where there's all types of group learning, group activities, mock trials and such, where there's constant interaction that goes on in other levels. I feel if there's an expert I am at one thing, it's cafeteria duty, because I volunteered for it for every year of my career. And dovetailing that with being an English teacher, I would see kids who would run into the bathroom and stay there to eat their lunch. The awkwardness of being, or couldn't get to the library fast enough because of the awkwardness of not finding a place where to be in the cafeteria. I'm talking pre-cell phone. You know, in other words, everything you guys are saying is absolutely accurate, but please always keep in mind the existing premises that were part of our lives beforehand too. Overall, that still exist that way. So a lot of our research came asking about the major questions who are dealing with whether you would like 3 choices for cell phones, whether you would like cell phones to be banned completely, and by the way, it's really worth keeping in mind, especially checking with the elementary school principals. That's really the case in all elementary schools at this point, that it's banned completely in the elementary schools. Second choice was to ban it in academic areas, and the third was to keep it the way it is. So we had about 38% or so wanted a complete ban, about 41% wanted it in academic areas, and 21% landed in the area of keeping it the way it is. The other place that might be useful for it, we serve teachers. And the other place it's useful was about devices. And basically the survey led to that there was a very strong component to only, if it's doable, only using school-issued devices. That's where the survey landed. I'll talk about where I think our policies, if the teachers had their druthers, where we would like to see things. But I think Max needs to go, or you need to continue before we use those things.
Max, do you have any other insights that you want to share with us based on your research and your surveys with the students?
Yeah, so I spoke to some of my research in the last meeting, and I think we're going to be able to post that on the board website just to get some visuals on that. But I think a lot of the concerns that are being that were mentioned here definitely shown up in that. A big thing is just reliance on phones. Just really is a big aspect of students' lives, included in a lot of scenarios. I have there's also some topics on, although there was data pointing to the distractions, of course, less productivity and that kind of thing. But there's also students were so a lot of what my research was focusing on, or the survey itself, was looking at just kind of cell phone use in general, and how students cope with that at home and how it's affecting them on a greater level and their regulation. And I think a lot of that is pointing towards students making efforts towards their own self-regulation. But a lot of that students, I think we had about 30% of students believe that their current levels of self-regulation were insufficient, and they wish that they had more, indicating that they wish that they had more skills for self-regulation and to deal with these strategies. And I think that's a big aspect of it, in terms of just device usage on a greater scale. Yeah.
I think the research shows the adolescent mind, no offense, is hard and not equipped to actually self-regulate in this area.
Like 25, yeah. You
So,
know, I think
it's not a shortcoming of your friends and the other students. It's just a genetic thing for a brain of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, that look, it's difficult for adults as well. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it's difficult for adults, but they've done that research, so it's not, everybody would love to have better self-control, but they can't. So it's not a shortcoming on them, there's really no tools. I understand what you're getting with, that the school can teach it, because just physically or mentally, I don't know what the right word is, it's a very, very difficult thing for I'll use the word adolescent, I think that's, I defer to Dr. Smith, but, I understand what you're saying, but it's not a shortcoming. That's just what it is.
So, sorry, I don't know if I'm understanding exactly, so it's, the research was pointing towards that.
Adolescents are incapable
of,
so, Dr. Smith, you say, because you're using our
It's
terminology.
just more of, it's not that it's not that they're incapable, it just means that they require more support and being able to help with that. So they need to be explicitly taught the skill, which is, I think, part of the reason why 50-year-olds still have trouble with it, because they weren't explicitly taught the skill.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's part of it, and it is hard for an adolescent brain to really fully make those connections. It's just more challenging because of the biological factors that
yeah,
exist.
that makes a lot of sense.
So, but it doesn't mean that you can't learn it. It doesn't mean you can't learn.
In the
I wanna
interest
let
of
Dr.
time, yeah, I'm
Goldstein
just
come
gonna.
back.
Okay. So I'm not really gonna go through the two. Academic dishonesty, we all know, we cheated before we had cell phones, kids cheated before cell phones, they cheat now, it just makes it easier, taking pictures, Snapchats of test questions, bringing it to their friends, things like that. Student safety, a New York Times study showed that phone bans have reduced bullying and fights. I think we did touch upon that. You have a group chat going on and a kid takes a picture of themselves and someone comments, oh, your nose looks big in that picture, and then they start talking about it, and there's a lot of things that go on, and that's just a small portion of that. Phones can be distracting during emergencies, so if we really need to have them focus on their safety, they're not able to, phone goes off and they're supposed to be quiet. But the big one that is a negative impact on social interactions, I know you were talking about the face-to-face interaction. This book, The Anxious Child, Jonathan Haidt talks about the truth of, there are
It's bigger than that, it's a whole generation.
There you go, it's a whole generation. The social skills, like what do you need for social skills? Eye contact, looking at each other, in-sync conversation, flow of interactions, like turn taking. There's none of that when you have a cell phone. It's much easier to hide behind the text. So it definitely limits that. And when, you want kids to be talking to each other, especially during like lunch periods and free periods when that's their time to socialize, if they're in their phones the whole time, they're going to definitely, it's going to decrease their face-to-face interactions. So that's just to sum it all up. That's basically the gist of it.
Just a couple, just from, I know some of the conversations that I've had with each of the people on the panel. I know, Mike, when we were talking also, I explicitly asked you, when you've spoken to teachers, do you think the concern is more from a focal standpoint or from an academic, the potential of academic dishonesty?
Right, it's much more, the impression I get, academic dishonesty is so much less of an issue than distraction. Because that's an everyday activity where it's a concern, rather than, you can be much more vigilant about the phone on the 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks that you're having a test. It doesn't mean they dismiss it, but the actual distraction is the bigger issue that they've cited. In a lot of the survey, there was a room for comments, and that's where it came up most constantly.
Any other comments from people in the audience? Joe?
I think the 2 points Matt made really resonated with me. One is that to prepare students for the real world, so if you take the devices away from them, and then they're gonna go out into the real world and be, everything you said, they're gonna have a lot of trouble integrating it back into their professional academic life. And, like prohibition, if it's banned during school, they're gonna wanna use it even more when they're out of school. And I did not read Anxious Generation, but I listened to 3 podcasts of people interviewing him, so I think that almost counts as reading it.
It was one
We'll give you credit for it.
You listen on the phone to it, right?
I'm walking, how many of you see me walking? And I think, you know, the point you made about teaching kids, students, and adults how to use this responsibly is much more important than a skill that we need to teach, rather than, I'm not saying don't ban it, you know, that's, I would, you know, from the teacher's perspective of how to text the classroom more than, you know, a parent or, but, I really think that we need to teach students positively, to use it to regulate and look at it as the positives. And I also, I think I mentioned this at the board meeting last week when Max brought up the survey. Dr. Gately had like device-free lunches. You know, I think the social media, like I think teaching interaction with Divya's point, like forcing sometimes when they can't use cell phone and have to interact like real people. So I'm not really sure where I come out on the classroom, but I feel like it's the main goal from what I'm hearing is teaching responsible use.
Well, listen, I don't know that there's one right answer to the question. I think, you know, we've all kind of agreed it's comprehensive. You know, that doesn't mean that we don't do anything. You know, there may be decisions to be made. What I feel strongly, and in, you know, not only talking to all the members of the panel, but any research and any experience I have with teenagers, is that, you know, if we choose to ban cell phones throughout the school day, it's not gonna make these issues go away. It may make the learning experience more in line with collectively what we want, or not. But obviously there's a parenting piece, and there's a home piece, and there's a collective community piece to this, but that doesn't mean there aren't things that we could, you know, that we couldn't be doing during the school day, to try to help our teenagers and help our kids become better users of technology.
Dave,
Aileen?
I just had a question for Dr. Hartnett. I know there are some teachers that my sons have had that require, you know, when they walk into the classroom, they can just shoe bag or whatever, shoe
Right.
tree, they drop their phones in the bag. Do we know like what percentage or how
Well,
many teachers sort
That
of use
was
that
what's
approach?
strange about that. That existed really much more dramatically pre-COVID, because then you had concerns about all the movement and bodies being near each other. So that's one of those things that to enact that, we'd have to discuss it through. You know, how that's gonna look is just one of the endless conversations we'd have to have. Asha, I think, had a comment.
I think the idea of self-control is very significant. Like for me myself, I use my iPad a lot and I turn my notifications off, but sometimes the distractions are inevitable. Like sometimes I'll be like, oh, I really need to tell my mom this, or I really need to check my grade on this. So I think the distractions are definitely inevitable, but it's important to educate kids on how to control themselves with the ideas of like using their phones in class, using texting on their computers in class, and that.
Going back to what Jill said, I keep having to remind myself that in college, you're in school 15 hours a week. 15 hours, that's an awful lot of cell phone availability for the rest of your lives overall. And, you know, so, you know, pushing them out the door in senior year, that's where I feel that we have a particular obligation of making sure we're trying to do something meaningful as far as this type of structure that Asha's talking about.
Good question for you. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised about the breakdown of the groups on your survey. I thought that there would have been stronger feelings one way or another, but they seem pretty.
And it was really almost, you know, 40, 40, 20,
Exactly.
you know.
No, but that's not the right interpretation.
Well, my question is this,
Oh.
I interpreted it as I did, and my question for you is this, if there were any comments, from teachers, you said I think that some did
Right.
comment, with regards to if there, like, or concerns about policing such a policy, or if it would take away from teaching, and so might as well keep it the
Well,
same way, to have to reinforce.
I'm going to leave that all to Brian Cummings in the back. You know, look, those are all of the logistics, and that's one of the things that we spent so much time talking about. Because, I was going to bury the lead, I have a lot to say on these topics. But ultimately, where we stand as a group, if you take the 40 and 40 together, we stand as a group of let's try to ban it during academic periods. And it'll still leave the ideas of still having an availability of release in certain places, and try that out and see how that works in such ways. And then we were talking about this, and whether or not you put the shoe, if you put the shoe, what do we call it? Yeah. You put it up there, shoe bags up there, now you're inviting students to go twice a period to longingly look at their phone and put it up there, and then when they're taking it out, as they're walking out the door in the hall, they now have it in their hand. Would it be better to keep it in the bag all the time? These are, we're getting into the weeds of how to go about doing that. But those are, that's
Do they
part.
take the phone with them, or do they not think about taking the phone?
Dr. Valachai, I wasn't saying, it sounded like 80% of Dr. Hartnett's members are against having them available in the class.
In academic periods.
In academic periods.
And that will be something that, where is an academic
40
period?
said nowhere in school, 30 said not in class. So if you add those up there, 80% of them are saying, we don't want them in our classroom. That's all I was saying when you were turning, because I think
Right.
that's a pretty clear answer.
But it's a big difference though.
73% of high school teachers said no.
Right.
Right, so it's
There's a
pretty
little bit of
consistent.
difference.
When
Yeah.
when I asked questions about negative feelings towards cell phones, that went higher. But the actual, how do you go about doing this, which is the big question, is where it gets tricky. Just a couple of words about this. If we look at this book is a very good book. But simultaneously, how did I buy the book? On Amazon. Then I proceeded to do some research on it. What did I find? This guy has a tremendously robust website with all types of podcasts. And, I even wrote down one of the things that, he has the Substack digital platform after Babel. And I said perhaps the most revealing sentence on his personal website is a pitch for the book's website. To see my current work on social media, go to anxiousgeneration.com. So, you cannot get away from the concept of commerce when it comes to these issues up against what's going on. As he's, saying to his shoe, social media, he's using it to peddle his book. Those two things coexist, and we just have to be aware. And yes, I understand that there's a different mentality of a 16-year-old than an adult. But I do think, I've seen enough addictions when it comes to the phone on other levels too, that this is not something that just, has a, tremendous marginal line at 18 years old when we're looking at these kind of things. I'm also reminded of, and I kept going back to this, I know this is idiotic probably, but I kept going back to Don Quixote when I was reading this book. And that is with Don Quixote, the whole plot is that this guy, Cervantes, is pointing out this gentleman becomes mad from reading too many romance novels. And, so the idea is that you get rid of novels overall, and you have the paradox that Dave was talking about, that how does he go about doing this? Just like this gentleman uses websites to promote his brand, but what does Cervantes do but write a book about the dangers of books? So you can't, and I think that's something that Max was talking about. There's certain things you can't avoid the realities of. We're living in the 21st century where we can cut down, like I said, our recommendation is to let's try banning them in academic classes, and also if we can pull it off. If it doesn't undermine, and that's something I would have to talk to the math department about, and such whether you need an iPad in certain classes or anything else. And just getting clear how you're going to make this function in an educationally sound way. So that's where we're at as a group, if you want the teacher response overall.
I just want to make sure. So you're saying the teachers would support an in-class ban of cell phone usage?
Academic subjects. I want to specify that, meaning we don't care about, we would like to look at it in such a way, if you're going to lunch, that's not the purview of an academic subject.
Academic class.
Academic
Someone
classes.
in front of the classroom paid to impart knowledge into that student's brain. There shouldn't be
a cell phone, and whether it stays in the backpack or goes in the shoe sleeve is another question, but yeah, we'd like to keep them away, and let's try that, see how it works. That would be part of, yes.
What are we defining as an academic class?
Well, that's another discussion, right? You know, it would be interesting, because I would like to have a conversation with whether or not an art teacher sees validity and as someone's drawing, and whether they can have on their headphones with a cell phone or not. You know, those are things that are worth discussing, or whether that's worth discussing on one period during the week. You know, I don't think we should be legislating this with a sledgehammer. You know, it's one of the things that was said about the superintendent search. You have to have a nimble, nuanced way of approaching all of these items.
So,
I just have one question
Go ahead,
as a
Amy.
parent, so teachers support, you know, putting phones in your bag for academic classes, but where is that, are we drawing a line, are we not allowing iPads, are we not allowing MacBooks, are we not allowing smart?
Because I wouldn't access,
Like,
the
well,
kids that have the iPads.
I think that's part of, listen, I think that's part of the ongoing discussion. You know, I don't know that, you know, when I wanted to make sure that I was helping to moderate a conversation and have a constituency of people up here tonight, I don't think the goal is necessarily to have an outcome tonight. I think it's to provide broad perspectives, to allow for community discussion. Obviously, there's still some extended conversation that needs to happen, certainly conversation for the board to have, and to share with the administration for us to collectively figure out if and what decisions we want to make going
But
forward.
here's the thing, I know what we're talking about, and each student is provided with a one-to-one Chromebook device for instructional purposes. All other electronic devices must be turned off or stored away during class unless specific permission is granted by a staff member. Failure to do so may result in a confiscation at the end of the day, only then returned directly to a parent. Devices may be used in the cafeteria or library if their use does not disrupt others. Due to potential theft, however, it is recommended that such devices are left at home. That is our current policy.
Yeah, and I mean, that is certainly part of the high school
To
program.
not hard, that's why it hasn't been enforced.
Right.
Listen,
As someone who's been here since 1993, that's news to me. You know, I'm just
Again,
saying that, again,
I don't know if that was, that's like an old.
Well, it's
like,
not from
I-
1993, because
No,
the
but
cell phone
I'm
didn't
saying-
exist,
no,
it
I know,
hasn't
I'm
been like
saying,
5 years
someone
old,
looked
it
at
can't be that old.
folder,
Right.
that folder
So
hasn't been.
I don't want to belabor the point too much. What I can say is I've been in enough high schools to tell you that nearly every high school in America has a policy or protocol that's almost identical to that. How it's been enforced and how the reality has played out as we've seen the growth of cell phone and technology, and how we've seen the reliance on devices in schools for a whole host of positive reasons, has, at least in Jericho, led to very much of, we've allowed teachers to be able to make decisions in their classroom to police how things can happen. I'm not saying it's working, I'm not saying that we shouldn't make
It's not
changes.
that old a policy, because it talks about our one-to-one Chromebook, we've only done that in the last 5 years. It's 5 years old, that's all it is, it's not like the world has changed. And I'm not saying that, but that's
And that's
what-
fine, but I also know there are iterations of that have been in place since the cell phones that were not smartphones, and I know that.
This is controversial. I mean, I think this is a great conversation. I don't see us coming to consensus tonight, and that was not the intent of this conversation. And, you know, based on your survey results, based on the survey results from the students that Max has done, I mean, I think this is all great information. This is something we're gonna have to digest. The other thing I wanna be, you know, just very careful of is kind of legislating what happens in a classroom when I'm not there. And you know, we have tremendous respect for our teachers, and, you know, if a particular teacher finds that, you know, having a device, whether it's the cell phone or the Chromebook or the iPad or the MacBook is, you know, beneficial for a particular lesson, I mean, I want them to have the flexibility to be able to use that. I'm a firm believer in, you know, the teacher is the skipper in the classroom, right? So what they say goes. If Dr. Hartnett decides that today's gonna be a device-free day, and we're just gonna talk about, you know, the passages that we read the night before, that's what it should be, and the phone should be down. I mean, my son got in trouble earlier in the week because, you know, the teacher said, you know, device is down, and he still had his, you know, squirreled away someplace, and, you know, answered for it, and appropriately so. But, you know, I think, you know, we have to, I would hope come to some consensus on what kind of maybe best practices are, but ultimately leave the ultimate decision to the classroom teacher, because again, based upon, some of these things, that there is, some benefit educationally to having these devices that the Chromebook can do. Again, I know we've touched on this, right? Is there?
We've touched on it, that doesn't.
The jury's not out, Sam, it's not my decision alone, but is there an issue with Chromebooks in math? I've heard that.
Yes.
With the Desmos calculator, I've also spoken to other districts where I haven't gotten into specifics because we haven't gotten afraid, but they don't have an issue with the Desmos calculator. So they have an ability to provide it without it being used on their phone.
Interesting. I mean, again, I think this is just a healthy conversation, and like I said, we're not gonna make.
We're not resolving anything tonight,
But this is just, we're kind of fact finding.
Yeah, so just to speak to something quickly, in regards to the policy in that folder, there's no student that, even if they're using their phone in the class, there's no student that thinks that they're allowed to be on social media while the teacher is talking to them. And on this, exactly, students are aware that this is, frowned upon, or it's not allowed, right? And to the same end, to the same end, there's no teacher that believes that if they saw a student on their phone, they wouldn't be allowed to take it, or they wouldn't be allowed to implement consequences. To what Aileen was saying before about the phone jails, or as some teachers call it, the shoeboxes, I actually put that in my survey, and so I had about 75% of students had at least to some extent their teacher requiring their phones to be placed in a bag, while 66% have dealt with, to some extent, a teacher requiring it in a shoe bag, or they're placed in a phone jail, as I phrased it on this. So there is regulation that's happening, right? To what extent that is, I'd love to know from a teacher basis, and to see, what percent of teachers are actually implementing that. But, in the status quo right now, teachers are putting in place, restrictions. They're putting in place requirements. This is phone usage in schools, in Jared schools, plain and simple, a lot of teachers talking is not an allowed thing if the teacher doesn't want it to be, right? But like you said, it still is happening. It still is occurring, and it still is occurring to an extent that maybe even if teachers are dissatisfied with it, they might not be putting in place, or they might not be enforcing it to such a large extent. So I think what that comes down to, barring outside of just full scale, to the extreme of full scale ban, it's a kind of perspective shift. And something I was speaking with Mr. Cohen about was, right now the default is, regardless of what it says in the handbook, right now the default is students are allowed to, or would be able to take their phone out without a consequence until a teacher, takes it, or until a teacher says something, and then it goes from there. I think, ideally, to limit the distractions, it should be kind of more of a paradigm shift where the default is, you can't do that unless it's maybe in an arts situation.
It's always a way.
Yeah, exactly, or unless there is, the teacher has expressly permitted usage for this, Kahoot or whatever it is, for that, positive usage in the classroom. But I think it's, we have that, just to summarize, we have that stuff on a larger scale. We have it on a centralized, we expressed, as a district, our, policy on it. It's just the way that it looks and the way that it's enforced, and I think that comes down to just a general perspective from the teacher side.
Personally, I'm against the jail, because to your point about having to learn how to control it when you're outside of the Jericho walls, yeah, it should be, put your phone away, don't look at it. You know what, if you do it, then it's that, but no, it's the jails and the bags, that's treating the seniors and the juniors, and that's treating them like kindergartners. I think you guys are responsible enough, put it away, and if not, the consequences come out, eventually, all those systems that you want to do. Look, we're not trying to recreate, we're not creating the wheel. There are other districts that have done this, that, our administrators and faculty can talk to and learn, how did they do it, what were the positives, when did they implement it, over what period of time, how did they implement it, what worked, what didn't work. So as Dr. Fresco said, we're not answering those questions tonight, but it seems like those are the questions we need to start asking, specifically because, look, everyone's in this building for an education. And the research as presented by our experts was, for the education part of the day, cell phones are a negative. From the people delivering that education, the teachers, 80% of them have said they don't want them in the classroom while they're educated. All the stuff about lunchrooms and libraries and hours and how you're storing those cell phones while you're in class and stuff like that, that seems like it's all something that could be fleshed out and may take a little while. But I think from everything I heard here, the premise, the core premise is that during the educational time, cell phones shouldn't be used by students in the high school. I think someone said that, you know, in the elementary school.
It's already done.
Already. And that should.
8 to 5, it's not an issue.
Yeah,
Sam, I think you're spot on. I mean, this is kind of anecdotal, and I hope kids are listening to this, but there's plenty of time to be chained to your phone for the rest of your life, because I know I am, and I love when I get this one. There was, so, you know, we talk about brain plasticity and neuroscience, and, you know, the age of 25, 50, whatever it is, at the end of the day, I would give nothing more than to put my phone down and sit in the Jericho classroom all day and actually learn, and not be distracted by devices and external influences. So, my message is, be thankful you're here, and there's gonna be plenty of time for that down the road, and try to take it as much as you can. And I promise you, Steve Jobs isn't teaching you anything. No.
So I want to thank everyone on the panel and certainly everyone here.
I think my takeaway wasn't that it was universal, that it was bad, and I'm not saying it's not bad, but I don't agree with Sam and Chris that the universal takeaway that everyone thinks it's a bad thing with its whole name.
I didn't say it was all negative.
all negative.
But you said universally, everyone wants it not in school, so I'm just saying, I took away from this that there are some
You're right,
positives.
80% only, and you're right,
Well,
it's not universal.
Again, I want to keep saying that in academic classrooms. I just want, because I want that to be defined, that in academic classrooms, that's where the 80% is.
Were the only respondents teachers in academics?
No.
No.
And again, I can tell you this wasn't a perfect survey.
But
and I
how many
don't-
teachers responded to the survey?
About 180 out of 330, so,
That's a good number.
and it was pretty much, because I asked the question, elementary, middle school, it did pretty much hit
to
whether
tell
it
us
was
about
special
the
area
shortage. That's
compared
nothing.
to. It was representative on that front.
Jill, just so we're clear, I'm not advocating banning anything. I'm
No, I didn't think you were, I'm just saying, I didn't take away that it was all bad. I thought that there were positives of.
In the academic classroom, what were
In
the
classroom,
positives?
yes. Look, there was a whole slide about it.
Well, that's why I said, leave it to the teachers. I mean, I think the default
I'm not
is,
saying we should come
don't
out
take it
in
out
a
unless the
way-
teacher says, you know what, this is gonna be helpful for this lesson.
Some teachers might think it's useful for the classroom.
There's another comment to that?
Yeah, the 80% that wanted it banned in the classroom, what is that, is the N including the non-academic teachers? So what I'm saying is,
Yes.
so
But
based on the academic teachers,
Right.
what percentage
And
wanted that out of the
That was a
classroom?
question that Brian asked in the back, because what is an academic teacher? I would say a music teacher's an academic teacher, and an art teacher's an academic teacher, but there's certain cases, like, the lines can become gray on that. The numbers were pretty much a cross-section. Looking at those numbers, was there a stronger input from academic teachers than the other groups? I would say yes, if I were measuring what the 180 or so. So that was a bigger input, I would say, than the non-academic teachers.
So if you were to classify academic as English, math, sciences, that type of thing.
Languages,
Yeah. What percentage do you?
We
would you
tried to
estimate?
do that and discovered that I'm not that good at breaking down constant contact surveys. Maybe I should have Max do all, and we called them on the phone and they weren't very helpful either. So I can't really give you an honest enough, I could lie to you, but I've already lied twice today and that's not gonna work.
I love conditional probability. There wasn't a way to sort individuals by their property.
We tried
Their
to.
response.
It was a very
Not
good question.
easily.
We were looking to do
A
that.
spreadsheet might allow us to do that, and then we might call the company they didn't have her answer. Like, who would want to know that? So we did not do enough, we would have to redo the survey. It's an excellent question.
Might one surmise that 60% of the staff who did not respond do not have strong feelings for the 40, 40, or 20, and have, I might draw the conclusion that however this unfolds,
They'll deal with it.
I'll deal with it.
Right.
Therefore, again, and I think you've heard me say this through the whole time we've had the conversation, over many issues, I trust the leadership of a teacher in his or her classroom. Period.
That's what makes it, the tricky thing, and I go back to Max's comment about a kid, of whether we have a general concept of not allowed, now more put away, and then it's more of an exception to take out, kind of what you were mentioning there, Kristen, sorry, that it becomes, the default is that it's away at all time, where the default is now, it's away, but we're gonna try to sneak it in, like that's more the, to see if it might be more of a tightening of the reins as much as anything
But
else.
the whole thing is with the teachers, it's like anything else, no one wants to be hated. And if you're the teacher who.
I don't really
if the
mind, honestly.
teachers let you don't mind so much, I understand.
Very Phillips, you can't hate
I wouldn't mind either, but there's people, they use the other, they let us use it in the other class, or the other English teacher lets me use my phone. What?
Yeah.
Of course, it happens all the time.
If we were confiscating the phones during this period right here,
Right.
about 75% of you would represent every one of us.
Again, for fear that we could extend this conversation all night, again, I want to thank everyone who's on the panel, and thank everyone.
Mike, we have it this way, and it's a service, it's a third-party service, it would have been better, but then, we were sending our first one, we didn't send it through the Michael server. Right. I know it could be higher, or, maybe closer to 9. Our teacher loves that.